The first time I kind of thought, hang on, this doesn't have to be my future, was really confronting. Really emotional, really strong sense of failure. Hi, I'm Amelia Lee from Undercover Architect.
Amelia and I met at the AIA National Conference in New York City in June of 2018 and returned to my studio to record a course together. A course we're releasing very soon. I knew her, like many of you perhaps, as the Undercover Architect from her podcast, but I knew little of her backstory. And in spite of having an enviable CV and an incredibly varied work experience, those aren't the things I found most compelling about her story. She stands as an example of just how quickly the practice of architecture is changing, and I hope also as inspiration to you of what that might look like. As an architect, she's worked countless hours for some of Australia's most prominent architectural firms, designing structures for the Sydney Olympics, managing and scheduling a team of more than 100 architects. She's worked in real estate development and finance, nearly every facet of our trade, relentlessly pursuing what many would consider to be the pinnacle of the profession.
So a group of 6 of us set up our own practice called DC8 Studio.
It was growing month over month, hiring staff, securing higher and higher profile projects. And when she arrived at this fortunate position,
I had a couple of personal things happen that really threw into light, is this where I want to be going? You know, it's expected that, kind of that is the pinnacle of you own your own practice and and I looked around and I thought, well, I kind of felt like my business partners expected that once my kids were all at school, I was going to step in and start being there more regularly than I was. And that hadn't been mine or my husband's goal for how I wanted to work. I felt like we had different ideas about how we wanted the business to grow. We'd never been really clear about setting goals and objectives for the business when we got together. And it felt like a really big machine to feed too. I think I saw every month what we had to make in order to keep the doors open and how we'd had to structure our finances in order to make that happen. And everything you own personally is on the line, when you're a director in a business. So at the same time though, architecture, there's 50% of the degree is female, but only I think in Australia it's less than 1% of females reach a director position. And here I was as a director of an architectural practice and being female, hang on, aren't I supposed to be really happy that I'm here?
if her path to that point was the traditional one, the one we're all taught to follow, her next steps were anything but.
The first time I kind of thought, hang on, this doesn't have to be my future, was really confronting. Really emotional, really strong sense of failure. Really why don't I want this? Am I less of an architect because I don't want this? Am I not cut out for this stuff? What? Seriously? I know I can work hard, but yeah, it was really, it took a lot to sit with that decision. Literally picked up my life and shook it apart. Signed up for a leadership and immersion program with a not-for-profit called the Hunger Project, and I went to Uganda. Within a week of coming back from that, told my business partners I needed to leave and we had to work out how that was going to happen. But I literally got back from Uganda and said, let's stop delaying the dream. So we started looking really conscientiously around the Burren Hinterland region. At the same time, I was thinking, okay, if I go there and work as an architect, I'm going to have to figure out how to cultivate a local client base, and I'm going to have to travel to sites all the time. And I've always felt with the architectural process, you get to decide the clients that you bring on and when you bring them on. Once you bring them on and you start that process though, you're kind of on the client's timeline. And for me, that had never worked. Since I'd had babies, that had never worked very well for the demands of family life and how to juggle that. So I was sort of looking for, and I literally looked everywhere else but architecture. I looked at an online marketplace for goods that had a charitable, like Tom's. So there was nothing like that in Australia. So I was looking at things like that and I was manic about it, really desperately looking for something. The Hunger Project, the not-for-profit that I'd gone overseas with, they believe that the key to ending hunger and poverty lies with those most impacted by it. So through education programs, empowering people to figure their own way out of hunger and poverty is the best way for them to be able to create sustainable solutions. So I'd seen how this worked, and they focused on working with women because they believe that when women are empowered, it creates generational change because they educate their children. Very low level of investment, really big ramifications. I think there's 350 staff worldwide in the Hunger Project, impacting 19 million people. It's extraordinary. And so I thought, okay, how could this apply to what I do, And I looked and I thought, I've worked in a development company for 7 years. I've worked inside a private practice. I've seen seen the decision making that has to happen. I've worked with homeowners. We've done our own 3 projects. I've seen how that works. I've got this quite kind of, personal and professional insight into home remodeling and building. I wonder if I could do something with that. And I started to think, gosh, all of that experience is locked up in that one-to-one relationship that a client has with an architect. And it's not potluck, but it is like a matter of like you finding the right architect for you, whether you get to tap into that experience, And I just felt like there were all these decisions that don't actually cost anymore. Things like orientation and space planning and getting a home to function really well for you. That if you know this information up front, fundamentally changes the home that you get to create. And I just felt this is far too important. People only do this once or twice in their life. It's a huge investment of money. It's where they live every single day. And we see all of the effort and time and money and expertise that gets invested into these great big public buildings and spaces that we might pass through, 3 or 4 times each year. But our homes, where we live every single day, we trust them to an app, we trust them to a builder, we trust them to, we just feel that it's not affordable to invest that level of expertise in our own homes.
Why Undercover Architect? What's undercover about it?
For me, Undercover Architect was about being people's secret ally. Whoever they were working with, whatever they were working on, regardless of their location, design or budget, that I could be their secret ally in giving them the tools and the knowledge that they needed to get a far better outcome for the home that they were creating. I looked at whether I called it Amelia Lee Architects. I feel like there's a lot of ego associated with the architectural industry for homeowners. And if I had my time again, I probably wouldn't put architect in the name, because people have an association with what architects do and how they behave. That probably has potentially changed the way that business has grown and reached people. But I feel also that I worked so hard for that title and it separates us industry-wise in terms of our professional liability and our obligations. And so if I could educate people what architect actually means, then perhaps that would help me differentiate from all of the homeowners out there. Like we have a lot of, similar to the States, a lot of people who are doing competition TV programs or, that type of thing. They might renovate or build 1 or 2 houses and then they start a business teaching other people how to do that. Like I've had over 20 years experience, over 250 projects, that for me, that wealth of experience needed to be packaged up in a way that really had meaning for people. So what I learned was, if I was going to choose doing a business like this, it probably meant I wasn't going to be seeing my buildings get built the same way that I had before.
That's a big deal.
Yeah, well, architects, we attach a lot to that jewel of the finished building that we create. It's kind of our business card. I have colleagues who run full service practices who insist that it has to be full service practice so that they can control that outcome. For me, I had to learn really early on that if I was going to grow this business, my reputation had to be staked on something different. My reputation is staked on what is the experience of the homeowner going through that process? How confident does she feel? How empowered does she feel? How does she feel that she's going to be able to navigate this in a simple and efficient and strategic way so she gets this home that she's dreaming of and doesn't cripple herself financially in the process? That she works with really great people to make that happen for her. And for me, that's what Undercover Architect became about. And it was really about seeing this, women actually make 80% of the purchasing decisions in any industry, and home renovating and building is very relevant in this regard. And yet she's walking into a male-dominated industry dealing with men inside the, construction and design businesses. And I'd seen this myself. We'd been doing our own renovations, and our second project, I remember I came on maternity leave with our son. My husband went back to work. He was a physiotherapist at the time, so he was going to work sort of 4 or 5 days, very long days a week. And I was dealing with the tradespeople turning up. I had walked off a site where I was on site every week, 150 odd houses, an apartment building, dealing with tradespeople and builders every single day. And I walked into our own project where we were renovating this old brick home, and I'd answer the door to these tradespeople, and I have a baby on my hip. The stuff that they were telling me, because they didn't know I was an architect. And I thought, my gosh, this is what the homeowner is going through. And she doesn't know how to speak up, how to feel like she's not going to look like an idiot if she asks questions that she feels she should know the answer to. And I got to see this firsthand, even as recently as we moved to where we are, we were getting pool fencing turning up. And the guys turned up and said, oh, we'll just wait for your husband to get home. And I said, well, I know what you need to know, but I'm up in my office if you need me. let me know. I'm not paying for your time, so it's your choice, you know. And it's not done to be mean, but it's just so conditioned in that industry. So yeah, I just felt that to really disrupt that and change the way that homeowners can feel when they go about building or renovating, that's what my reputation needed to be staked on. If I armed and educated them, then the buildings would be great anyway, you know, and they would have had a fantastic experience, felt in control, felt like they were driving the process. And that's how we get rid of the dodgy builders and the designers that aren't so great, because I'd sat across the table from enough builders and developers who said, the client's not going to ask for it, so we're not going to do it. And the client's not going to pay any more for it. And I thought, I need to teach these homeowners that they can demand better than what they're getting from this industry. And there are so many good operators out there, but the bad news travels so much further and faster. And I just need them they are the ones that they hold the key to their home being a successful project or not. They just need the tools to be able to make that happen. I've said to other architects, I probably spend a day and a half a week doing my blog or my podcast. And they're like, what? How does that earn you money? Like, we're not taught as architects how to run businesses. And yet business strategy is so much of being profitable and sustainable and continuing to be able to serve clients. Like, you've got to be able to make sure cash is still coming in the door. In hindsight, it kind of probably looks like I had this linear path to where I got to. It's never felt like that.
You're not a real architect though.